Mr. President, I rise to speak about the votes we're going to have today at 2:30 regarding sequestration, and really want to strongly support the notion of giving the executive branch the flexibility that it needs over the next 7 months only to work through this situation in a more graceful way. To put this in perspective for the American people, we're going to spend $47 trillion of your money over this next decade, and it was incumbent upon a bipartisan group about a year ago to try to come up with $1.2 trillion in savings over that 10-year period. Believe it or not, that didn't happen. The sequestration was a method to ensure that at least there was some reduction in the growth of spending. And I do want to say that there have been a lot of discussions about reductions in spending. The overall effect of the sequester over this 10-year period is not to reduce any spending, but really to slow the growth of spending over the next 10 years. We're one of the few entities in the world that doesn't budget off last year's spending. It's not like your city or your county or your state government or your household or your business. We budget off projections and growth. And so the task a year or so ago was for a group of 6 Republicans and 6 Democrats to come up with $1.2 trillion. It's beyond belief that that did not occur, and so sequester was put in place as a mechanism to ensure that there at least was some slowing of growth. The first 7 months of the sequester is the most ham-handed portion of it, in that it's cut at the PPA level, it's across the board, and focused on 2 important categories. I agree that it's ham-handed, and the only thing worse than sequestration, in my opinion, would be kicking the can down the road on some much-needed fiscal discipline here in Washington. So I hope that what we'll do today is get behind a very thoughtful proposal that would say, look, we're still going to reduce spending by this amount, but we're going to give the executive branch, because this first 7 months is handled so differently than what happens after that. After that, by the way, appropriators live within a top-line number, but they're able to weigh in on how that money should be spent, again, in two more specific categories than just the overall budget. So it's just this first 7 months. And so I was at home last week in Tennessee. I talked with diverse groups of citizens. Democrats thanked me for being willing to give some flexibility to the president to work through this. Business people obviously hailed this as incredibly intelligent. They have to deal with these kind of issues right now. Many of them over the last several years have had to do the same kind of thing. And so obviously to them, it's a very intelligent thing to give the executive branch a degree of flexibility where they have some transfer authority to work through this in a more graceful way. And Republicans thanked me because it was a way for us to at least begin turning the curve in a different direction, and certainly still having the cuts that are necessary in growth, I might add, not in real spending. But that's where we are. And so today we have a proposal. It's the Toomey-Inhofe proposal, which gives the executive branch flexibility to work through this. It's my understanding they don't want that flexibility. I can't imagine being President of the United States and having something that I thought was a little bit ham-handed, and Congress say, look, we'll candidly defer to you to make some transfers. I've talked with some of the folks, by the way, in our security apparatus in this nation, and what they have said to me is, Corker, look, we understand we're going to have some reductions, but if you would just give us some flexibility, we can work through this gracefully. We can live within these constraints. And speaking of these constraints, I want to say that there's a number that's been thrown out of $85 billion over the next 7 months. Again, know that this is Washington language. We're really only talking about half that in real spending outlays. We have budgeted amounts, and then we have outlays. We do things very differently than most people back home do them. And so this is not near the amount of reductions that people are talking about as far as real money flowing out. So I strongly support the Toomey proposal, the Inhofe proposal. I hope that others will join in and at least move to debate this issue. I have a sense that that's not going to be the case today. maybe next week, when some things happen, maybe others will be open to doing this. But I can't imagine anybody in this body, if they think that draconian things are happening in a specific area and that some judgment could be used to really alleviate that, I can't imagine why anybody in this body would not want to give the administrators of these various agencies the ability to have some degree of transfer authority to make it work better. I don't imagine there's a business in our country, whether it's a one-man shop or a large corporation, that wouldn't want that flexibility. I can't imagine a Democrat or a Republican really thinking it's a bad idea to give the administration the ability to be more graceful in dealing with this. But today it looks like we might have a partisan vote. It's a shame. Again, this is ham-handed. We can make it work better. Hopefully on March 27th, if we continue on this course until that time, obviously, to me, the only thing worse than this ham-handed approach is not enacting the $1.2 trillion in cuts. So that has to happen, in my opinion. But maybe on March 27th, when the appropriators come forth with a continuing resolution, maybe they will have shifted this around to a degree so that we end up with the same amount of spending reductions. That's the way regular order should work here. That's the way the Senate should work. That's the way the House should work. It's not that far down the road. As a matter of fact, I'm understanding that if the Appropriations Committee wanted to, they could pass out an omnibus, not a CR, but an omnibus that's already gone through the checks. I think the two staffs have been working. I'm talking about at the House and the Senate. It's my understanding they could pass something out in a week. So I think that maybe there's going to be some discussions about this later in the Majority Leader's office. Hopefully he'll give the green light to the chairman of the Appropriations Committee to move ahead with something like this, which would be very sensible in my opinion. I think most people around here would love to see something actually happen under regular order. And then these reductions, which are necessary, in my opinion, to House in order, much more needs to be done beyond this $1.2 trillion, much, much more. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't believe that deficit reduction greater than $1.2 trillion needs to occur. And right now we're focused on the cuts side. We focused on the income side at the year. But as we move ahead, if we can deal with these issues under regular order where committees have looked at the impact, that is the best way to go forward. So again, sequester will kick in tomorrow. I think we all understand that. There's a better approach. There's an amendment today or a bill that would allow the executive branch to have the flexibility it needs to work through this in a way that is least harmful to the American people. If that doesn't work, another step with a continuing resolution in 3 or 4 weeks is another way of hitting this in an intelligent way. So, Mr. President, I hope we have the opportunity to work this out in a way that is better for the American people. But at the same time, I hope we will not back away at all from at least $1.2 trillion in spending reductions. I hope we'll move later this year into real entitlement reform, which is really where all the money is. And by the way, to the American people, the reason that we're moving to sequester and the reason that we're cutting discretionary spending is we don't have the courage in the United States Senate to deal with entitlements. When the word entitlement comes up, everybody runs for the hills. They know that's where the money is, 62% of our spending. In 10 years, that in interest is going to be 90% of our spending. But the reason that we're really here today is that this body has not come to terms with the fact that we have to reform entitlements for them to be here for future generations and certainly people who are getting ready to retire. And so that's a shame. And so we're going through this pain again due to lack of courage in the United States Senate to address the real issues of the day. That's a shame, and that's what you're going to see playing out is solely because of that. I've got a bill that would deal with that. Lamar Alexander, my colleague from Tennessee, is a co-sponsor. It's based on Bowles-Simpson, Domenici-Rivlin, bipartisan concepts, but for some reason, when it comes to dealing with the real issues of America, this body runs for the hills. Hopefully soon we'll be brought back together. We'll deal with this in a mature way, deal with the real issues that our nation deals is dealing with, solve them, put it in the rearview mirror, and all of us come together on focusing on those things that would make our country stronger. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.